Hi, everyone. So I have a surprise today. Today I will be talking with Commissioner Nicole Wilson. I'm extremely excited about this episode. This is Watered Down episode 4. I'll invite her in a few minutes. Oh, yeah, I see you.
Yeah, do I request to join, right?
Yeah, you can. Hold on, let me. Okay, yeah. I'm going to add you. And then it should be coming up soon.
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
Wow, Instagram access.
Hi, you guys. People are coming. Okay, let me accept Nicole. Do you see like it coming up? I think I invited you.
Duplicates. Do you see like it coming up? I see you. This is kind of cool. On the Instagram feed. And it just says to share, go live. There we go. Cool. Look at that. Okay. Sorry, you can tell which one of us is 50.
So we can end the Zoom.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No problem.
Easy breezy.
Here we go. Oh, we did.
Hey.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
No problem. Hi, Quincy. Okay. So, hi, you guys. Today is episode 4 of Watered Down. I'm so excited about today's episode. We'll be talking about clean water with Commissioner Nicole Wilson.
It's my favorite topic.
I was actually surprised because I was doing a little research and I found out that you were an environmental attorney.
Yeah, that's right. I know.
I'm extremely interested in, so we may have to talk later about that. But
I would love that. This makes me so happy that there are interested people and that any bit of experience I have that I can pass on, that you can pick up the torch and run, makes me really happy.
Thank you. Okay, so we could just jump right into it. So Commissioner Nicole Wilson, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. So my name is Nicole Wilson. I am actually an Orange County resident for, gosh, now we're 26 years, but I was born and raised in Gainesville, Florida. And as some of you know, despite their, the reputation for the football team, it's also a beautiful, beautiful place where I was fortunate to grow up visiting our springs and our, the natural forest that were there. Paynes Prairie is right there, and going over to the beach, to the inlets. And so really growing up in a place that I understood the treasures of our natural world. Fast forward, I ended up actually getting my undergraduate degree in psychology and human services, which has nothing to do with the environment, but it did, it was a very interesting topic for me to research and to get my degree in. I worked in mental health for a little while and then realized that my probably true calling was in law, and then returned to law school. I ended up getting a study focus in an honor certificate in earth and environmental law, which allowed me then to participate in and become an editor for the Earth Law Journal. I was able to even argue Clean Air Act issues up in New York, and it opened a whole world for me and became what I realized was my true passion. I'm a practicing public interest attorney, but right now, because I'm also the District 1 Commissioner for Orange County, I don't do a lot of practicing. So this is trying to make sure that the residents of Orange County have a voice here in government, and especially when it comes to things like anti-pollution, water quality, water quantity, we talk a lot about, but everything, as far as making sure that representation is fair and equitable.
Okay. So I just want to give a little bit of background, you guys, because I know some people are like, Okay, what was Water Day? Because Water Day was just yesterday, everybody. So
Happy Water Day.
I know. So World Water Day, I just have a little bit of info on it. So World Water Day is an annual United Nations observance starting in 1993, and it celebrates water and raises awareness of the 2 billion people currently living without access to safe water. A core focus of World Water Day is to inspire action towards Sustainable Development Goal, SDG 6, which is water and sanitation for all by 2030. So, I know a lot of people probably don't know, but I live in Florida, you guys, and Florida is known for water, like
Yeah.
that's what we know for. Miss Wilson, how has the accessibility of clean water become an environmental issue?
It's such an interesting thing because I think much like all of our natural resources, there is a perception of an infinite quality and an infinite quantity. And that's just not the case. And Floridians in particular have fallen victim to archaic property law, which allows property owners to do what they want to on their property when it comes to the impacts to water. And that it ranges from agricultural, sometimes industries being able to pollute and getting around the Clean Water Act, all the way down to consumptive permits and the ability to pull water from our springs and bottle them.
Yeah.
Water from our springs is bottled and sold all over the world. But Floridians need that drinking water. We are, within years in some areas of having available groundwater. And so we have to really think about the limitations we have, and then also think about creative ways to make sure that we learn how to better recycle our water. We waste so much water here in Florida on things like our yards and on car washes. And, this is drinking water that we're not leaving for the next generation. And, or even us,
Yeah.
if we, if we don't really figure this out. So yes, Florida is in a precarious position and doesn't have a great legal framework for protecting it.
Yeah, okay. So I'm glad you said legal framework, because I might go to the question about, so I recently saw Florida, I want to say December 2020,
Yeah.
U.S. EPA announced that Florida is the first state in more than 25 years to apply for and receive approval to implement a Clean Water Act program.
Okay, so this is. Do you watch me rubbing my head? Because for those of us who practice environmental law and look at the layers of protection that we really try to find in public interest in trying to defend water bodies, right? Defend our water. It was an absolute loss for us to forsake the ability to ask the federal government to uphold the Clean Water Act in Florida. Don't get me wrong, Clean Water Act on its own, without any, switching off who's carrying the responsibilities, has some really big deficiencies. But ultimately, to have all of that responsibility that was placed in the agency of the EPA handed over in 2020 to Florida gives all the confidence in the world to an already really short-sighted sometimes state system. And our state system is, under Rick Scott, obviously it shrank as far as the ability to impartially protect our water. There were decimations in our water management districts.
Yeah.
There were really lofty political positions given away that really needed to be scientists. And then we, had our backup whenever we were trying to really make something enforceable was to go to the federal government. And here the federal government, through this application, handed it back to Florida. So it's, it's not a good thing. What it tells me as a local leader and as a state citizen and as somebody in this world who cares, is that we need to try to find places we can fill in the gap here in local. At the state, we need to really retool the state.
Yeah.
And then up the line, right? If there is more legislative agency oversight at the federal level, those checks and balances, much like in any other form of government, but I think especially in environmental law, because oftentimes the victims are without a voice. You know, our rivers, our lakes, our water bodies are without a voice. Oftentimes, our human victims are our most vulnerable and without a voice. You think about some of the largest environmental disasters that have happened in our world have happened to communities who have already gone through a whole, hit list of things. And so it's not a victimless crime when you talk about environmental crimes. And I think we just have to make sure that where there's opportunities, we take those opportunities and not just throw our hands up like, well, Clean Water Act, it's off the table. It was always deficient. We needed more tools.
So do you think, because I'm really interested because I took environmental law last semester.
Awesome.
And so I'm just like, okay, at first when I was reading it, I'm like, oh, that's awesome. But then as you're talking about it and like, breaking it down, it's almost as if they took the power from EPA to say, okay, well, we have control of our water, so then they can then make more money off of it, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So, and I think that you're hitting on a bigger issue, which is the permitting process, right? Okay. So when we think about the biggest levers that we have in government right now with our toolbox, our legal toolbox, the permitting system through EPA, through the DEP, so through our federal and our state. And typically, or before that 2020 transfer, it still was a collaborative effort, and there are many things that are delegated on down the line. And for instance, we do air monitoring here in Orange County that then goes to report to the state, that then goes into the overall air quality monitoring that the EPA does. So seeing that the EPA, the federal government, has handed the state all those checks and balances, that it's all in-house, and that you're exactly right as far as what happens with the sort of the ability to make sure things are happening in a way that we understand that our special interest groups that are trying to make money off our water or are trying to get around anti-pollution measures, that it comes down to money, right? We know that this is a business issue. Yeah. And so when we look at that and you look at those influences, clearly, the more checks and balances you have, the better. Inherently, though, and I want to say this, permitting it's not a good tool to have on its own. And this is why the rights of nature movement gained traction in the legal community, is because permitting, by definition, is asking permission to do something that you shouldn't be allowed to do, right? So permitting is asking permission to either release a certain amount of a pollutant into the water, or to take a certain amount of groundwater, or to place some sort of industry somewhere close to something that they can contaminate. So there's different levels of permitting, but all of that inherently is permission to do something.
Yeah, and do people, because I know like with permits, there's like a limit, but I found that like corporations and firms sell permits. So it's
absolutely.
So now
it's a shell game.
Availability to pollute more.
It's a shell game. And we should do a whole nother one of these on mitigation and wetland mitigation and that industry. It's an industry. It is a money-making industry, and it's a shell game. There is no mitigation happening out there that adds a wetland. We don't get to add a wetland by mitigating. All it does is allow somebody to broker some land use and saying, we're going to buy this one over here to make up for the one you're destroying over there. It is still a net loss, no matter how you look at it. And in mitigation all over the state of Florida for wetland, and wetlands are important for not just our water quantity and being a buffer, they're important for our carbon sequestration, and they're important for our water quality. It's our filter, it's our lungs, and it's our kidneys. And so to see destruction, legal destruction based on permits, where the threshold here in Orange County, but even probably worse in some areas around the state, is only that to get that permit, they just have to show that there's no other reasonable alternative. So if I'm building a car lot somewhere, and I've purchased the property, and it's on a wetland, and I go to get my permit, and I say there's nothing I can do but put down a parking lot to park cars on. There's no reasonable alternative. That's all they need. That's all they need. That's the whole threshold. And, you can drive around Florida and it explains the problem, but I think this is also a national issue because all of our laws in when it comes to environmental protection, and that's, they vary to some extent from state to state, and some states do a better job. But all of them are based on the idea of offering a permit or permission to do something.
Mm. Oh, wow. I'm glad we're talking about this. For some of because this is called like watered down. So like I brought this, I wouldn't say platform, but I bought this like podcast, if you look at Instagram, to kind of water down environmental issues. Because I feel like a lot of people know about climate change, they know about some environmental issues, but they don't necessarily know the details of them, right? So I think because I study this, I know like the verbiage that is used, but sometimes when I'm talking to people, like I could see like I lose them when I go too far. So I'm breaking it down.
Listen, and I think you are, I just talked about this with Hannah and Lee, and I have brilliant, brilliant people I get to work with here on my little team, that I think that that's by design also. That I think sometimes what the process has done, because the agency is complex and there's, it is, and some of those things are always going to be complex. The scientific side should be complex.
Yeah.
But I think that they try to make it less understandable so that the average citizen, who, by the way, should be able to trust that their local government, their state government, and their federal government are protecting their water, that they can't really jump into the conversation with any real meaning, because we've added 7 billion acronyms and you need a whole list of definitions. It's really unfortunate because people do care.
Mm-hmm.
People do care. And, you don't need to look far to see that every time Florida has put a constitutional amendment on the ballot statewide that had anything to do with conservation or the environment, pollution control, it always like overwhelmingly is supported by voters. Here in Orange County, our Right to Clean Water Charter Amendment, it literally came in as the highest approval of any charter ballot in the state of Florida. And it was purely an anti-pollution measure. So people care about this issue. They've been shut out by that, unnecessary, I believe, verbiage.
Yeah. So I'm just going to break down the Clean Water Act real quick so people know, like we were talking about. So everyone, the Clean Water Act was actually enacted in 1948, but they amended it in 1972, which is now called the Clean Water Act. It establishes basic structure for regulating discharges of pollutants into the water for the U.S., regulating quality standards for surface water. So I'm trying to think of a way to break it down. Like, it establishes kind of guidelines, you guys. So to say this water is, this water is not good, or this water is good because there's certain maybe sediments or chemicals in the water. And these sediments and chemicals come from us. We, through water, recreational activities, gas leaking, oil leaking into the water, to agricultural usages. So even when we fertilize our grass, that water, when the rain comes, runs off into the water. And those are chemicals that are in the water. So the Clean Water Act is basically a guideline to say, hey, like, this should not be in the water. This is not okay. So it just gives structure to say, what is clean water?
And listen, and I think I love that you are kind of breaking it down. You look at the history of the Clean Water Act, and it was actually brought into being after a river caught on fire.
Yeah.
Caught on fire, a burning river. And, you and I weren't even on the planet yet when this happened. I was born a few years later. I'm a lot older than you, but the idea of even having those protections in place had not been contemplated. Because if you look at the history of mankind, it wasn't until after the Industrial Revolution that we started really utilizing what were very, very harmful and damaging chemicals. The more advanced we got in our manufacturing, the more of those chemicals ended up needing a place to go.
Yeah.
It is mind-boggling when you dig deeper into some of the ways that they've disposed of them, because some of them never go anywhere. Microplastics and plastics never go anywhere. They're always going to be on the planet. And it's another good part of the conversation, if we're going to water it down, for people who are trying to make just consumer decisions about, can I try to get away from plastic and buy the bigger container and then just refill it when I need to? And those all those little things add up. So there are so many places that just as residents, as citizens of the planet, that we can make some changes. And it doesn't get to the underlying Clean Water Act as far as being able to enforce something more stringent, but it's at the very least giving us some power back as consumers. And a lot of change over the years has come at the power of the pocket. And if we make decisions as consumers that we're not going to buy things with microplastics and we're not going to buy things in small plastic containers, then the manufacturers have to listen. Yeah. And so, if you think about changing policy and the tug and the push and pull of it, we can enforce on one side and we can, as consumers, utilize and encourage on the other side. And that gets us, maybe will get us to a better place. And the Clean Water Act, the problem with it, and I think it was interesting, there's a lot of problems, but the one that always strikes me as somebody who's looked at the cases that felt like they could really get some traction in pollution control is that it is for only point source pollution. And just to make that a more understandable, think of a pipe. Think of a pipe. So if it doesn't come out of a pipe from a factory, and I think we've all got this visual in our head of the acetone plant with a big tube piping out something that was going downriver, that's the application of the Clean Water Act. And so if we think about the effluent that comes from a farm, just that runoff, or the runoff that comes from, golf courses, sometimes neighborhoods, it doesn't even get to be scrutinized by the Clean Water Act as it's written right now.
Wow. Oh, wow. Okay, so we only have two more questions and we're done. So in what ways is climate change impacting our access to clean water?
Oh my gosh, this is such a great question because this could be a whole day, you know that, right? So in Florida, we have a very shallow water table. And as our climate changes, as our oceans creep up, the salinity intrusion continues to, so I was talking earlier about the consumptive side, right? How much are we drinking out of there? How much are we using out of that water table? On the other side, how much of what was our clean, fresh water, how much does that now have salt in it? And it's happening. It's happening in South Florida. This isn't something that we're saying we're not trying to plan it for the future. This is actually happening. And so, talking about what climate change is doing to the access to clean water, if you think about entire areas that are, Florida is, some down here on America, whatever, if we, in some kind of climate migration, end up going north to try to find clean water, we may have some more opportunities. We have interstate welcomeness right now. But if you think about worldwide, what's going on, and you think about what happens in smaller island nations, where once that water's gone, that entire island has to get up and leave. They have no more access to clean water. And when, we talk about having refugee crisis. Yeah. We would be absolutely so short-sighted to not think about the impacts worldwide in areas that are much like Florida. We have the opportunity to see here on a micro level what could happen to force hundreds of thousands of people to relocate within, I would say the next 10, 15 years. Yeah. So to think about humanitarian efforts on one side is important, but I think ultimately, if we don't get to the goals to reverse, not just to slow down, but to reverse the damage we've done, I don't want to be a doom and gloom, because I really believe that we have the ingenuity, and I believe in science, and I believe in our compassion and our ability to find answers. But I think we have to be really open-eyed about it, and especially in Florida, where we understand this probably better than they do in the rest of the country. I think it's hard to have conversations with people in Montana about a shallow aquifer,
Yeah.
and how quickly things that are being dumped on the surface of our ground ends up in our aquifer, and what it's like to really take a look at an ocean that's coming in every year. It's
Right.
coming in a little closer.
Right. I'm glad you talked about that because I think if people viewed environmental issues as, I wouldn't, yeah, I mean, some of them are human rights issues. If they viewed it more like this can really affect me and affect the people I love, I think that's when true action can probably take place. Because I'm
Absolutely.
a lot of environmental issues that I'm like, this is affecting people's human rights, like people's access to water, people's, like you said, refugees, like migration patterns are going to shift drastically. So I think if people saw it more as human rights issues, it would be more, there would be more precedence to, be more active.
It's exactly right. And once again, this is the basis for a lot of the what I feel like is study, but unfortunately, we haven't gotten much further than that. Those worldwide environmental injustice, which I think we get a visual of a lower socioeconomic neighborhood right next to a manufacturing plant. And that's sort of the textbook version of
Yeah.
environmental injustice. But when you look at the global impact of climate change,
Yeah.
it is an absolute, it's the, I think, probably the ultimate example of environmental injustice, because the nation states, the people, and I mean peoples of different countries who will be the most impacted, are oftentimes the least likely to be able to have some resolution. They're not the biggest contributors to global climate impacts. They don't have the most resources to figure out how we can undo those impacts.
Yeah.
But they'll be the ones that will have to pack up and go somewhere, and will literally have to give up their homes and potentially their lives if we don't figure this out.
Absolutely. Oh, wow. This is going really good. Okay, so the last question. What are some practical ways people can help keep our water clean? So, I really like to end on a note of like, okay, well,
Yeah.
let's go and conquer the world.
And this is one of those, I want anybody who's listening right now to maybe, for starters, I think it's important to dive a little deeper into any part of this conversation that you found interesting, because even though you and I both think it's interesting enough to study it, that sometimes even just getting a little bit of background on things like the rights of nature movement. When I first heard about it as an attorney, I was like, that sounds a little woo woo. What is that? And it really, once I got into what it was about, was really breaking down those deficiencies that we have currently in our box of legal tools, and realizing that nature, as an inherent need for human existence as well as natural existence, we're all one,
Yeah.
Doesn't have a legal footing. There is no legal footing. So a corporation can go into a court of law as though it were a human, but a river, a forest, and even something as basic as the Florida black bear has no right to defend itself in a court of law. And it's just a deficiency. It's a blind spot. But much like many of those blind spots in America that we've had, and I believe that we can change. I believe we can change these things. That's why we're having these conversations. That's why we're trying to get policy moved. That those rights of nature laws that you see sort of getting foothold in places go back to that blind spot. So, I want people to take a look at those. I'll share as much as, anybody that wants to read about what we've done here in Orange County, or some of the more in-depth legal analysis on the right to nature movement. Really, it's founded in the Native American thoughts about the way we treat our planet. And so the indigenous Americans got it right, because they understood that we are one with our soil, with our water, and with our air and our sky and our sun. And if we didn't figure that out, that we would perish from it. And you know what? Here we are making full circle and saying we've got to codify the things. We've got to codify. We've got to put it in law. The exact things that we were, stomping on as, bringing in archaic English common law. We've got to get away from that. just, go back to what we understand
Yeah.
works, which is we are part of this planet and we have to be part of this planet. But I'm sorry, I just went on a complete tangent, and I know that it was about finding ways.
It's funny you said that because the last episode was about land conservation. I think he's still in here, my friend Quincy, and we talked about just giving that land back to,
Yes.
yeah. So it's funny you said that.
And, farming practices. So I spoke with Betty Osceola about the farming practices and understanding that keeping soil untilled in agriculture has a huge protective and carbon sequestration benefit. Well, that was indigenous. That was indigenous agriculture. And I love that now we're like, light bulb goes off and we're like, hey, we've got this great idea. I'm like, no, as it turns out, the two best things we have going for us are what God created, which is a tree to hold on to carbon, wetlands, which God created to hold on to carbon, and the practices of the indigenous people that knew this, that understood that if we fight Mother Nature, she will win.
Yeah.
And we will perish. So yeah, it's exactly right. And I wish I'd caught the land conservation. I'll go back and check it out if I can, because I'm enjoying this so much, and I love that you're having these conversations, and that these I think what were at some point sort of, they called me radical on a postcard for having these conversations and saying that this is something that you can't isolate from protecting the health, safety, and welfare of humans.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Well, I think, okay, so if you do have anything that you want them to read, you could just have Miss Lee email it to me, and I'll just put it.
Perfect.
So thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Watered Down. I'm sure we'll be in contact after this, but
I would love that. This has been such a delight for me, and I'm sorry I could talk about it for days and days. So I hope I didn't, I hope we didn't miss any other questions that were burning questions. But if there are, please reach out. We will continue the conversation.
Thank you so much, Ms. Wilson.
Thank you. I am so grateful for you. Thank you so much for everything you do.
Bye. Okay, so everybody for joining. I will write everything or some of the stuff that we talked about down below. Thank you for joining. I know this was a little surprise. I didn't know that she would be available that soon. So I hope you guys liked it, and I'll see you guys for the next episode. Bye.